Friends, neighbors of the Colorado's 4th Congressional District, welcome to our virtual forum where we're coming together to talk about something that's near and dear to all our hearts, the future of our democracy and the future of this district. Let's get real for a minute, if we could. We're living in uncertain times where the very freedoms and rights we hold dear are under threat. But fear not, because in times of challenge, there's always opportunity, and that opportunity lies within each and every one of us. The recent endorsement of Lauren Boebert by former President Donald Trump poses a significant danger to the integrity of Colorado's 4th Congressional District and to the values we all hold dear. Boebert's alignment with Trump's divisive rhetoric and extreme policies threaten to further polarize our community and undermine the principles of democracy. With Trump's endorsement, Boebert's platform of fear-mongering and obstructionism gains a dangerous level of legitimacy, putting at risk the progress and unity we strive to achieve. We must remain vigilant against the erosion of our democratic norms and reject the politics of division that Trump and Boebert represent. That is why we're here today. Today, we're not just looking for any candidate. We're looking for someone who's not afraid to roll up their sleeves and fight tooth and nail for every single person in this district. We need someone who's not just a politician, but a true advocate, someone who's ready to stand up and be a champion for the freedoms that Coloradans and all Americans are at risk of losing. So as we dive into this discussion, let's keep one thing in mind. The power to shape our future lies in our hands. Together, we have the ability to make a difference, to create positive change, to ensure the voices of every single person in this district are heard loud and clear. So buckle up. We're in for an inspiring and thought-provoking forum today. Let's find the leader who will not only represent us, but will also defend our values and protect our freedoms. Because in the end, it's not just about winning an election. It's about building a better tomorrow for all of us. Thank you for being here, and let's get started. Jared?
All right. My name is Jared Munger. I'm the first vice chair of CD4. I'm also the chair of Morgan County Democrats. I'm going to be reading the rules of this forum, starting with that questions were created by a team of members from the CD4 Democratic Party leadership based on the questions submitted by you all, the voters, attendees, and candidates of this forum. The order of the questions asked was determined by the order each candidate declared their candidacy for CD4. And this order will rotate with each question, 1, 2, 3, then 2, 3, 1, and so on. So it'll go Ike, Karen, and then Trisha. And let's see, next one is each candidate or surrogate for an absent candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves and the candidate. That'll be the first topic of discussion. Number 4, question will be asked to the first candidate following the order defined in number 2. And they'll have 90 seconds to answer. The other candidates in order will have 90 seconds to answer the question and or respond to the answer given by the other candidates. The first candidate will then have 30 seconds to respond, a rebuke. Let's see, we're going to do a lightning round. During that, we're going to have a quick answer round. Candidates will be asked a yes or no question. There's only a couple that are short answer, but most of them are yes or no. And there will not be an opportunity to rebut. If time does allow, we'll take some questions submitted by the audience in chat. So if you've got questions during the forum, put them in the chat, and Lisa and I will look at those at the end if we've got time. The candidates, there will be a timer on my image of your allotment. And so there is a audio that will play at the end of the timer. It's pretty, it'll cover up what you're talking about, actually. So it's actually kind of neat with this. If you do go over the time, we'll issue a warning. After the second warning, then any subsequent abuse of the time allowed will result in being muted when the timer goes off. Number 8, candidates are asked to avoid personal attacks and be respectful and polite. Disagreeing and contrasting oneself can be done in a respectful manner. If someone does attack another candidate, we will give them a warning to move on. If they choose to ignore the warning, we will move on to the next candidate or question, and they will be immediately muted. Number 7, candidates will end the forum by giving a 2-minute closing statement. And last, any unanswered questions submitted by the audience, vetted and provided to the candidates for answers and published on the CD4 website, along with the recording of this forum. So those are the rules of this. And it looks like now I pass it on to Lisa to start.
Okay. So, and I'm gonna unmute all of you. If you mute yourselves, I will be sure to try to catch that to allow you to unmute again. So, Ike, we're gonna start with you. You have 2 minutes to introduce yourself.
Well, hello, Congressional District 4 constituents. Most all of you know who I am. I'm Ike McCorkle. I'm a retired Marine Corps officer, a Purple Heart recipient, a lifelong Democrat, proud father of 4, and a active community member. I care deeply about the country and the Constitution that I swore to support and defend, and intend to continue defending it with further service. I was the 2020 and the 2022 Democratic nominee and received Governor Polis's endorsement, Senator Warren's, and many others. I'm very proud of the work that we've done over the last 2 cycles in District 4. Now, in 2020, as you all know, we were in an R+12 district, and we won 37% of the vote. And in 2022, after redistricting, CD4 shifted from R+12 to R+26.6, a district that Trump won by 30 points. Now, we have to think very hard about how we're going to win in that district. The way that we're going to do it is by going out and engaging the 30-odd% of voters that we've lost in each of the rural counties since Betsy Markey's election back in 2008, and I've developed a name recognition, and those individual voters out there in rural Colorado and Sedgwick and Phillips and way down in Baca County and Prowers, they know who Ike McCorkle is. And when we enter this general election against an extremist, we're going to have the opportunity to flip the reddest district in CD4 blue. From 2020 to 2022, we maintained 37% of the vote, even while the district shifted from R+12 to R+2. That is the biggest shift since District 4 elected Betsy Markey in 2008.
You're muted, Lisa.
Whoops. Thank you, Ike. Karen?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Karen Breslin. I am obviously running for Congress. I bring decades of policy, public policy, government experience. I'm a political science professor. I worked for 2 decades for the National Park Service. I was a journalist covering Congress, the executive branch, the General Assembly. I have some very firm and strong ideas about why we're in the condition that we're in this country. And to understand Trumpism, you have to understand the defects in our political process and the fact, my kitty's roaming around up here, and the fact that working people in this country have not been treated well by the political process for about 2 to 4 decades. So we know that we're losing ground economically as middle-class people and lower income people as well. And that's a function in large measure due to government policy. Trump has played on that. They're calling themselves advocates for the working class. If you listen to the rhetoric now, we're going to defeat that rhetoric by showing that Democrats are, in fact, the voice of the working class. You make me your nominee, I will be all over this district touting the needs of working families, struggling to pay for retirement, college tuition, their mortgages, save for a down payment, and so on. This is entirely doable to flip this race, but it takes understanding Trump's appeal. It takes understanding MAGA people. I've been in this district for 15 years. I have Trump neighbors, Trump supporters who are my neighbors. I have family members who are Trump supporters. I don't demonize those folks. They're voting from what they think is their self-interest. And how we defeat Trump and people like him, including Boebert, is by pointing out that they aren't actually supporting the working class and the working families. You make me your nominee, that's my goal. I need your support to get on the ballot. Without your support, it's not possible for me to become the nominee of this party. I will bring my decades of experience to this race, and I will flip this district. Thank you.
Trisha.
Okay.
I gotta stop muting myself.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Trisha Calvarese. The pronouns are she, her. I'm a Colorado native. I grew up in my earliest days in Logan County in Sterling, where my dad was the city attorney. And I grew up with Highlands Ranch. I was raised in Douglas County schools, which led to an academic scholarship, a full merit ride at the Johns Hopkins University. Didn't become a doctor, but pursued my passion for writing, film media, psych, brain science, and then proceeded to graduate into the worst economy since the Great Depression, caused by Wall Street greed and speculation. From there, I was able to talk my way into becoming Senator Sanders' very first press intern, while at the same time being a fellow at the Women's Campaign Forum, which is dedicated to getting more women in office. Most recently, I was with the AFL-CIO. That is the largest organization of working people in the country, representing people in every field from both sides of the political party, as well as the National Science Foundation as a member of the Federal Civil Service. Now, I was there to help shape and pass landmark legislation that has billions of dollars of opportunities on the table to bring home to our district. Now, I was working on all of those pieces when I got a call that changed everything. My mom, who'd been taking care of my dad, who had cancer, got sick herself. So I came home, provided end-of-life care, and now I'm staying because we are so overdue for Medicare for all, because reproductive rights are on the ballot this election, not just abortion rights, but even our access to things like IVF. That should be covered. Anyone should have access to it, as well as for our economic opportunity and jobs. And this isn't just the most important election of our lifetime. If we get it wrong, it could be our last. So Trisha, for Colorado.com, please sign up, and I want to hear from you. Let's get in touch. We can do this. We can flip this seat. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Trisha. All right, and then Howard. Oh, wait, sorry. I don't know what I just did there. Howard.
All right, thanks, Lisa. CD4, thank you so much. John wants to send his regrets that he could not make it today because he had a previous engagement with his kids. So that's something that he could not break today. And I thank you for having me speak on his behalf. My name is Howard Cho. I'm the former vice chair of the Colorado Democratic Party, and I strongly support John and believe in his candidacy for CD4. His campaign is built on rebuilding the equity of working families all across Colorado and the nation. He's taken the fight to Washington to protect our environment, tackle the opioid crisis, and defend our civil rights and women's reproductive freedoms to ensure every resident in this nation has access to health care. We need to reinvest in the public education and focus on the innovations that will uplift our industries and create a new economy for everyone to thrive in. He's going to push for strong safety nets and restorative policies that will give the opportunities to every underserved community. This campaign is about accountability and servant leadership that represents the voice of the people. Now, you all might have heard John talk about growing up in a blue-collar community. He's a manufacturing engineer with a climate science background. He's the son of a nurse and a carpenter growing in a small coal mining community. But what you might not know also is John's values is as strong as I've ever known. He organized within his company, within all the people that work there, for better healthcare, for better pay, and try to unionize a worker in the company I worked for. His reward was he got fired for that. His values are far beyond his own. He believes in the values of everybody else. He had believed in sacrifice. He believes in commitment to excellence. And that's just the type of person we need in Congress, the kind of character that will defend us no matter what the cost is. Someone who will stand up to the cronyism, to the corporations, to all the traditionalism in there. So remember, renew our values, climate care, and women's reproductive rights, rebuild the trust with servant leadership. It's time to re-engage those who have been left behind. Thank you so much, and hope we have your support for John Fedora for Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard, for being here and for being an advocate and a surrogate for John Fedora. So with that, we're going to move into our questions. So we've compiled as many as 14 long answer questions based on timing. But somewhere in the middle of there, maybe after the 8th or 9th question, we're gonna go ahead and pop into the lightning round, and then we'll finish up with those more immersive questions. Try to change it up just a little bit. So with that, I will ask you the first question. And this first question will go to Karen, since Ike started with introductions. Karen, the Bureau of Land Management released its final plan for managing surface and mineral rights on millions of acres of eastern Colorado, setting aside key wild spaces and scenic river miles, but greenlit accelerating oil and gas drilling. What is your position on their decision?
Well, what I know from my time with the National Park Service is that a member of Congress can't overturn a decision made by a federal agency without legislation. So that said, my position would be irrelevant, as would any other member of Congress. To the extent that lands are being protected for their ability to absorb carbon, I would be supportive of that. To the extent that lands are being used to destroy the earth and to produce more fossil fuels, I would be opposed to that.
Okay. Is that okay? Are you finished?
I'm finished.
Okay. Trisha, you have 90 seconds, even though Jared is a bad timer man right now.
I think that the faster we can begin to develop in our clean energy infrastructure, the sooner we can transition away realistically from oil and gas. So one thing that I want to absolutely do in Congress is advocate for turning those investments that are on the table through Inflation Reduction Act, scaling up our capabilities for clean energy transmission and storage so that we can move quickly away from oil and gas, and also making sure that we're taking care of the folks in the oil and gas industry as well. That's the most important part. If you actually want the political will to transition to a clean energy future, you need the folks who are working in the fossil fuel industries. So, and I know that's a little bit of a different issue, but it's all connected, right? So that's a big piece of it. And I think that carbon capture sequestration is really important. Fracking can be done. Technically, it can be done if done correctly, right? If we're not trying to maximize profit. So I think that's the other thing, is looking at these like companies who like, do they have a track record of being bad or not? And also, is there a way that we can maybe make sure that people who are fracking are adhering to some form of kind of safety or regulations?
Right. Ike?
Well, like I mentioned in my intro, I think we need to stay laser focused on the needs of our citizens and how we win this election. We're not going to win it if we oppose operations of industries that are the leading developer of revenue in District 4. District 4's economy is driven primarily by energy. So I want to serve on the energy and commerce, and I want to serve on the ag, because those are the two committees that stand a real chance of, actually influencing policy to benefit the constituents of District 4. And those constituents include industries and oil and gas. And oil and gas is a major developer of revenue in District 4. So I would support the Bureau of Land Management's policy decision, and at the same time support federal legislation to require energy production companies to more rapidly transition their production from fossil fuels to renewable resources, while at the same time protecting the jobs of energy industry workers. Coal miners out in Craig, Colorado were left behind when gas became more lucrative. I don't want to leave workers behind.
Thank you, Ike. That music is killing me. Karen, you have 30 seconds if you wanted to respond or elaborate before we move on to the next question.
Yeah, carbon sequestration is untested technology and also likely to be dangerous and ecologically destructive. There is no such thing as clean energy. Renewable energy involves mining. Mining is not clean. There's nothing remotely clean about mining. Right now, they're destroying a lithium mine in Nevada. They're destroying sacred native sites there and lots of open land that was sequestering carbon. You want to sequester carbon, leave the land alone. So I oppose policies that will actually harm the climate. And
I'll change it to just a beep.
I don't know, it's kind of festive.
Jared, the next question is from you.
All right. Scientists have recorded a 20% decrease in river water in the Colorado River Basin over the last 100 years and expect to meet only 80% of the average this year. What can be done to ensure the sustainability of Colorado's water supply, and what current technologies or new policies would protect this crucial resource?
Great. Thank you so much for the question. This one is one of the most important questions, period. I think one of the big pieces, something that's missing, is we need to make sure that folks who are using water are native, that they live in our states, that they live in our communities, that they're not Saudi owned, growing things like water intensive alfalfa during a drought. So I think that the big thing is to look at our agricultural practices. What can we do to support our growers in the transition from water intensive crops, things like corn, which is not a native species and takes 1/10 of the amount, or I'm sorry, takes 10 times the amount of growing our native species like beets and things like onions, right? So if we can transition to those agricultural products and figure out ways that we can incentivize it, that's a big start. There's also different kind of climate tech pieces that we can begin to experiment with. In the Inflation Reduction Act, I believe it is, there's $4.5 billion to kind of start these climate startups and small scale testing of research and development projects for water, like recycling water, brown water, black water. So I think that those pieces are all very important. And then we also have to look at our residential use of the way that we're building and making sure that we're not going to let developers, as happened in Douglas County, a horrible for-profit scheme to want to build a ridiculous pipeline like a straw through the desert to starve water from our farmland. Absolutely not going to let that happen.
Thank you, Trisha. Ike?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that could you say the question one more time?
So we were asking about what can be done to ensure the sustainability of Colorado's water supply, and then what current technologies or new policies would protect this crucial resource.
Thank you. Yeah. So as far as the current situation, we've been in a 20-year drought. The farmers and ranchers out in eastern Colorado talk to me about it all the time. One of the main things that we need to pursue with technological development and industrial development is ways and means of recharging the Ogallala Aquifer. And that way, the farms that are out there can actually continue to produce while we are experiencing extended periods of drought from human-caused climate change. Now, carbon sequestration is absolutely critical to the answering the environmental crisis, and that's clear. And that's one of the things that we need to do to stabilize our watersheds. We need to develop capped storage so that transpiration and evaporation don't suck 25 to 30% out of our water storage facilities. We need to allow smart development of solar-powered condensers that can drip feed farms. And all of that is doable with money from the Inflation Reduction Act. Sorry.
Thank you, Ike. Karen?
Well, the Colorado River, the allocation of the Colorado River is controlled by the Colorado River Compact. And so states have a right to access that water based on the provisions in the compact, and states have been voluntarily renegotiating as a result of declining flows. The larger question about the overuse relative to a limited resource really goes to population growth, agriculture practices, the things that Trisha and Ike have talked about. One thought might be doing something like a conservation easement for people who have water rights, because right now, if you have a water right, it's a property right, like an automobile or a piece of land or what have you, and you're entitled to alienate that. So give someone an incentive to not do that. And that could potentially be done through federal law. I'd have to think about that a little bit more from a legal standpoint, but it might be an option to encourage people to keep the water on the, within the aquifers and toward more productive use. We also have to get past the mindset that we can have everything all the time. We can't have unlimited growth in a desert environment. We have exactly one river in this part of the world that is not already destroyed. When you dam a river, you destroy it. When you take water out of it, you deplete it, you wreck the ecological integrity of that river. So if we continue on this high growth path of high population growth and unsustainable crop practices, we're going to have rivers that are depleted beyond any ecological, integrity. And we're already there. We have, like I say, one river left, Yampa, and developers are actively trying to get to that.
Right. Did Trisha, you have 30 seconds to rebut or respond.
I think that one thing that's so important is having a really good representative who's going to be willing to work with folks like the Colorado Ag Water Alliance, who are amazing, to help them connect with the money that's already there for the federal government. There's already grants on the table, but making sure that they can apply to those grants and that we're getting them to our giant district, right, of making sure that this money is hitting places it never has before, for places that have been left behind. And then also seeing what works and scaling it. That's an incredible opportunity we have that's unique to this district.
Thank you, Trisha. Okay. As you all know, border is front and center all the time. So how do you think the immigration process should and can be improved? And do you believe that immigrants have an overall positive or negative impact on our country?
I think I'm supposed to go first.
You are.
Yeah, immigration, without a question, has a positive impact on the United States economy. It's the reason why the United States is the only nation in the world that has experienced, only, 7 to 12%, depending on which year you're talking about, inflation of goods over the last few years. If you look at European countries, they're in the neighborhood of 12 to 20 and even higher percentage of inflation of goods. And so, immigration is a huge buffer for the United States economy, and we need to acknowledge that. And we are a nation of immigrants, and we do need to treat people with dignity, respect, and humanity. The border is a crisis, and we do need to acknowledge that. It's a generated, intentional crisis. Even Mitch McConnell said the only reason the immigration reform bill didn't pass is because Donald Trump didn't want it to, and so he had his minions in Congress oppose it. We shouldn't have individual actors influencing our Congress to such a degree. And we need to get dark money out of politics so that we don't have paid for politicians casting votes again that, that timer's killing me, that actually sink good immigration bills.
Okay. Karen?
I think we need to think about the root causes of the problem. U.S. policy in Latin America has much to do with the conditions that people are fleeing there. Our drug use, our economic policies are creating extreme deprivation there. People are fleeing for their lives. They're not fleeing for a better life. They're fleeing for their lives, literally. This is why they will go through so much to get here. And I've seen this up close and impersonal when I worked for the National Park Service on the Arizona border. I believe that migrants are a net positive to this country. I come from a family of immigrants, as many of us do. People didn't want us back in the day either. I'm Irish American. And I believe that this issue has been demagogued by the Republican Party, and I would not stand for that. And I would remind people that we are a nation of immigrants and that many of us weren't wanted either. We have a labor shortage in many industries. Migrants can really help fill that void. We need a humane policy. I would never agree to policies that restrict asylum. Asylum is an international human rights law obligation on the part of the United States. I do not support further militarization of that border that makes it even more harmful, more dangerous for people to come here. That said, I think there needs to be significant resources deployed to cities and local governments to help them deal with the flow of people. And this is where I'm a bit disappointed that there hasn't been more action on that front. Local communities should not have to struggle with the influx of people on their own. And I think the Republicans have a very solid talking point on that we Democrats need to respond to in a coordinated way. Thanks.
Trisha.
Okay, absolutely. Immigrants make America great, always have, like, hopefully always will. I think, like, starting with the border, like, one of the big issues that you're hearing from a pragmatic standpoint is we need more amnesty judges. There's folks that want to come here, they want to work, and they want to do it legally. There's a backup. So we need to realistically, like, look at reforms like that. And the MAGA caucus, ordered by Donald Trump, is playing political football with this issue. Let's be very clear. They don't want to solve this issue. They want to create a crisis by demonizing immigrants. Now, our farm workers are one of the most integral workforces for our economy in Colorado. Like, we need to make sure that those workers can keep coming here. Same with our nurses, our caretakers. We need pathways to citizenship to get folks out of the shadows. As long as there is a shadow exploitable economy, just based on people's immigration status, it hurts all working people. It drives down wages. It's bad for all of us. I'm also really concerned about the separations of families and of children working in our meat packing plants right now. That is absolutely unacceptable. That's a huge part of reform that nobody's even talking about. So that's a big piece that I would specifically like to lead. We're in a competition as well with China and Russia for STEM talent specifically. So not only at our border, but writ large, we want to remain a place that's welcoming for immigrants and where top talent wants to be.
Okay, and then Ike, you have 30 seconds.
Gotcha. Well, I'll just expound upon the fact that we had a really good bill and it was shot down because of partisan politics. We need a representative in Congress that can not only reach across the aisle and get unaffiliateds in our district to vote for us, but reach across the aisle in the United States House and actually compromise with the other side of the aisle and communicate with them to get them to support bills that are good for the United States and for United States national security.
Okay, Jared, next question is you.
I had to reset the timer back to 1:30. This is you give me the easy ones here. How will you work to address the increased tension between the United States, its allies, and Iran? And I think that goes to Karen first. Yep.
Wow. Well, members of Congress don't generally play much of a role in international relations. But as a member of Congress, I would be asking very hard questions of the State Department and the Defense Department about the policies that are pursued. As a scholar of international relations, which is something that I've been studying for a couple of decades now, these situations are really quite murky, and often there is a subtext to the actions that the United States and other governments undertake. That just stands to reason. So I would want to understand what the motivation is for the policies that the United States is pursuing right now. We have the public explanation, and those are, I'm sure, part of it. But it's also clear that we are venturing into some, what's the word, maybe unstable territory here with this much international tension on so many fronts. And I'm not 100% convinced. As a member of Congress, I would be wanting to understand from the administration, the Defense and State Departments, what is the game plan here? How many fronts is the United States going to be engaged on at any one time? What's the ultimate end goal? Because most of us have lived long enough to see multiple foreign policy disasters play out over the course of our lives. And that generally is a function of inadequate questions being asked early on. And we've learned historically that had those questions been asked, we might have been able to avert some of these foreign policy disasters.
Trisha?
I think specifically as regarding Israel, I would absolutely recommend that President Biden go around Bibi and address the Israeli people directly. I think that he needs to advocate for a strong Labor Party. And I commend Jason Crow. I think he's done a really excellent job in pushing the administration to push Israel where they can. I'm really fascinated to see what Saudi Arabia does here, because there's historically the region, it's been Iran and Saudi Arabia kind of in this like epic, pardon my French, but pissing match for who has the most kind of like authoritarian brand of Islam, of Sunni versus Shia Islam. That seems to be shifting a little bit. So I don't know if we can necessarily take the old alliances for granted, but I certainly know that we need to fund Ukraine obviously yesterday, and that the longer we continue to dally on that, the weaker we look, the worse we look. I mean, and China's watching. Above all, I am most concerned about Russia. I am concerned about, I mean, he killed Prigozhin, he killed Alexei Navalny, and now Putin is just completely decimating Ukraine still. So that's my number one priority, is making sure that we get funding to Ukraine. And then I would say on keeping in mind that the nature of war has changed, right? So it's not just like an armed conflict on a battlefield. There's also cybersecurity. There's kind of like shoring up our STEM capabilities. So also investing in those pieces as well.
I
I think we have to acknowledge the fact that the world is in a conflictory state right now, and we are engaged in a worldwide fight for democracy. With respect to Iran, you have to understand the fact that Iran has funded Hezbollah, has funded Hamas, has funded the Houthis, and they're attacking international shipping. It's not just Israel. Traffic through the Suez Canal and the Straits of Hormuz. Traffic through the Suez Canal has been reduced by near 70% since the Houthis have been attacking international shipping. They're directly funded by Iran. We have to dismantle revenue streams coming out of Iran that are funding the creation of these terrorist armies in the Middle East, because they're extremely destabilizing. We have to work hand in hand with our allies. We have to fully fund Ukraine in the fight against the Russian Federation. We have to acknowledge the danger that Iranian-funded terrorist armies pose to the entire region, and through commerce that is moving through the Straits of Hormuz and through the Suez Canal.
thank you. Karen, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I think it's important to remember how Iran got onto the path that it's on, and that's through U.S. involvement all the way back to 1954 and overthrowing a democratically elected government. I only bring that up because the animus toward the United States is of long standing. And whatever actions we take there, we need to understand the long-term consequences of those actions. There is so much anti-U.S. sentiment there. Oops, out of time, almost out of time, that it's very difficult to
Did you want to finish? It's very difficult to
take any action without creating multiple consequences down the line. And this is where U.S. foreign policy has really come up short. We know this in hindsight, of course, but we ought to be benefiting from hindsight. Okay, when we overthrew that government in 1954, what was the consequence of that? Or 55, I think it was.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question. Totally shifting gears a little bit. Moving back home. Trisha, you'll begin. The Federal Victim of Crime Act funding stream has been cut in half since 2018, limiting victims' access to support and leaving victim service providers working beyond their means while the needs of victims have grown. As Colorado faces another decrease from the federal government of 40 to 50%, the risk of community-based services shutting their doors is very real. How will you work to repair this situation at the federal level and meet the needs of the most vulnerable citizens in CD4?
Yeah, I'm so glad for this question. Thank you so much, Lisa. I mean, I would do absolutely everything I can to make sure we're making the investments like in our care infrastructure to make sure that specifically women, people who can have and who have children can always be safe. I mean, we just have so many cracks in our system. And I think what is so terrifying is in a post-Roe America, we're seeing the threat not just to abortion rights, but how there's an overreach driven by this Christian nationalist agenda. You look at Missouri, where pregnant people can't even get a divorce if their spouse doesn't let them. That kind of overreach absolutely plays into domestic violence, into creating these like horrible kind of situations where we let domestic terrorism happen without any recourse, without any intervention. So what I would do is just every opportunity, every bill, every committee, keeping in mind like those are the people who are absolutely in need. I'm really concerned about WIC funding as well, which just, I mean, that has literally kept millions of people like out of poverty. It's helped women feed their children, it get their, breastfeeding assistance even, and Republicans have systematically cut that, not just Boebert, but Buck and across the board. So I'm going to fight for that in every single committee I am. That's something I'm going to try to find a way to, there's kind of like good times where you want amendments on everything. That's one I would absolutely push for, is for victim services and support.
Ike?
I would echo everything that Trish said in support of victim services and support. I was raised by a tough single mom. We were on welfare, food stamps, free meals at school. And that's exactly what gave my mom the opportunity to lift herself up by her bootstraps, get back on her feet, get a commission in the Air Force. So, I've seen directly how social support systems benefit our families and allow our kids to show up at school with a meal in their belly and a jacket on their back, and so I would fully support fully funding victims, victims excuse me. I would support fully funding all efforts to, aid the victims of domestic violence. And, that being said, I would do what you have to do in the United States Congress, and that is converse and compromise with my colleagues until we came up with an acceptable solution that would, in fact, replace that federal funding. I think that's not the only place we need to replace federal funding. Since the pandemic, veterans services have been cut in our rural communities as well. So victims advocacy and veterans services in rural Colorado definitely need to be funded and addressed at the federal level.
Thank you, Ike. Karen?
So the only committee that would have jurisdiction over funding this particular line item would be the Justice Department Appropriations Committee, and I'm sure there's a subcommittee under that would start that process. When that process began in the Appropriations Committee, that would be the time to rally state officials and organizations and develop a letter that could then be sent forward to the committee and as to the administration to lobby for full funding. Usually there's a gap between what a president proposes. If it's a Democrat, it's likely to be a fully funded request for that program. If it's a Republican, it would likely be an underfunding. That's when you need to rally people who are supportive of that program, organizations, government officials, et cetera, and bring some pressure to bear when the Appropriations Committee is actually talking about that particular program.
Thank you. Tricia, you have 30 seconds.
And beyond just these social services that we're talking about, for women to have like the economic platform to get out of an abusive situation, I would also want to work with the labor movement, because union apprenticeships are earn while you learn models. And I have seen it when working at AFL-CIO, it can literally bring women out of violent, horrible situations, and they can get on the pathway to a family supporting job for themselves and their family. That doesn't cost the government anything. It's just we would be helping build those bridges so that those women can lift themselves up economically through a good union job.
Thank you. Jared, next question is you.
All right. What are your ideas for restoring public confidence in the federal government as a force for good in their lives of everyday Americans, many of whom no longer feel that the government is addressing their needs and concerns? And I think Ike. Yep, you go, Ike.
Well, I think that we need to show up. you know, in every single community in our district. And we need to compromise in the U.S. House and make sure that the U.S. House and the Congress is functional. People don't trust Congress because it's dysfunctional and it hasn't gotten anything done in the 118th, the 119th. So when I get into the U.S. House, I want to work across the aisle to get legislation passed, to work with my colleagues on the Farm Bill. But I want to show up in every one of the rural communities that is in District 4 in the eastern 21 counties and have face-to-face conversations with my constituents and convey the message to them, you know, that regardless of their affiliation, left, right, in the middle, Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated, independent, Green Party, that I care deeply about them, about their families, about their communities, about their businesses, and that when we go into the United States Congress, they're not going to lose contact with us, that they'll have a direct voice and line communication with their Congress and their representative in Congress who's going to be fighting for their communities and in order to support their businesses. And so I think we win people's trust and confidence by showing up and by doing the work and by being consistent and dependable.
Thank you. Karen?
I think that it does boil down to making sure that your constituents know that you're available to them and maintaining open lines of communication, having an active presence in the district as an elected official, which I would do in a pretty intensive way. I also think that there needs to be transparency in how government does its business. Too much of what Congress does, and I say this as a reporter, is opaque to the American people because so much of what Congress does is special interest legislation. I would be in a position, due to my background, to be able to explain to people exactly what key fights are pending before Congress and rally them to offer their thoughts to elected officials, including myself, about what they would like to see happen. The third thing I think is bringing civility to the conversation. We absolutely need to stop the partisan rhetoric that is so divisive. We need to stop the name calling. We need to stop the labeling. We need to really listen to each other. Okay, you support Trump for which reason exactly? What is it about Trump that you actually like? You're opposed to this particular provision. Why is that? What is it about that? You're comfortable cutting school lunches. Why would that be? And then take what we learn. And, you know, if it's an indefensible position, then we make hay with that, frankly, right? Because that's an entirely appropriate thing to do. You want to cut school lunches because you're opposed to government programs. Okay, fine. But you're fine with subsidizing the wealthiest people in our society. Is that where you stand, Mr. Republican? So, yeah.
Trish?
This is such an important point because gutting the federal government, federal civil servants, is part of this Project 2025's objectives, which, if you haven't heard, Project 2025, it's this heritage Christian nationalist plan. It is a total slide towards fascism, and it begins by gutting the federal government civil service employees. Now, these are folks. They don't make a lot of money. They make something like 27% than they could be making in the private sector, right? And they do it because out of a sense of duty and service to their country. They show up, they do their work. And the ironic thing, right? Let's distinguish between the dysfunction. It's the folks in Congress led by the MAGA caucus. It's people like Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, right? And they're making $200,000 from taxpayer dollars in order to hold up the government. Because when these continuing resolutions, continually not funding the government, as a federal employee myself, who's worked very hard, and I know that most agencies are underfunded, are understaffed, and those folks are working extremely hard, it creates even more work. And I think that's the point, right? Is that chaos created by folks like Lauren Boebert. Because when you have a continuing resolution, you have to come up with, pivot and do these other works and other plans on top of it. So I'm going to show that government works by bringing broadband to our communities, by bringing good union jobs and education opportunities to our communities, by showing people the power of federal government for good.
Ike, you have 30 seconds.
I think we need to show up. 100%. If we want to win people's hearts and minds, if we want to make them trust their representative, they trust that Congress is going to be functional again, I think they have to know their representative personally. In these rural communities all across eastern Colorado, individuals are driven by, face-to-face conversations and having coffee and showing up in Lamar. And that's what I'm going to do.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. Karen, this question starts with you. We continue to witness our poor air quality on the Front Range. We are one of the worst non-attainment zones in the nation. What will you do to move the ball forward on combating our climate crisis?
So that is something a member of Congress can do. And I would call for field hearings, of the relevant committees, and try to partner with other members of the delegation, Democrats, Republicans alike, to try to bring some field hearings to communities like Denver that are in non-attainment. Any legislation that needs to be drafted to improve EPA's enforcement capacity, it might be appropriate to remove enforcement authority from the state. If the non-attainment is not being addressed properly there, that might be an issue that needs to be brought up with the governor. So I would be seeking a conversation with the governor and the head of the Department of Environmental Quality to find out why the state isn't taking enforcement action on these issues. And then, as I say, elevating that up as need be. But that's definitely something that a member of Congress could be very effective in doing something about. And why it hasn't happened now, I think, is probably, sort of a political question. Do you want to really alienate the various industries and the various players in this process by making a fuss? But I covered environmental hazards for the Environmental Institute, or the Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, part of the National Health Institutes. And air pollution is terribly dangerous to people's health. I mean, we know that, but what we don't know is that it transpires over a long period of time. And so elderly people, children, they're most vulnerable to these risks, and it should not be allowed to continue.
Thank you. Tricia?
All right, so I was working at the National Science Foundation, which if people don't know about it, that's an independent federal agency. They fund every single field of science and tech. You pick up any, like your phone, your computer, the Zoom call, all of the technology started with funding from the federal government. Now, usually how it works is that funding just goes to the universities on the coasts. Recognizing that that needed to change, the Biden-Harris administration, working with my agency, has just recently awarded a groundbreaking new type of innovation model called it's the NSF Climate Engine for Colorado and Wyoming. There is $80 million for climate tech startups, and a big part of it is experimenting with air quality monitoring, measuring, ways to improve it. I think that innovation, like we have huge problems. We know that, and we got to move quickly to solve them, but it's such a huge opportunity to be able to innovate. And what's happened is in our country, too often that's come from the coast. We haven't gotten those innovation or that input from people in rural communities. So that's one of the reasons like I'm running is we have all this untapped agency, all this untapped potential in our rural communities to help solve these big problems. And I want to help bring the resources and connect them to the places that have been overlooked and left behind for so long.
Thank you, Tricia. Ike?
And so we are the world's #1 energy producer. I think that at the federal level, congressionally, I will have to work with colleagues to get this done. But I think we need to set federal benchmarks for energy production companies that do a few things that protect workers' rights and protect workers' paychecks in the industry so they can still put food on their table, so they have peace of mind. While we do reassure them with workers' protections for energy industry workers, we need to at the same time pass federal benchmarks that require energy production companies to transition certain percentages of their production in a scaled fashion to reduce their production of methane and carbon and its admittance into the atmosphere. On another note, we need to address the biggest polluter in the entire world, which is the United States Department of Defense. And we need to require the DoD and DARPA to do innovation on carbon sequestration, because carbon is so high in the atmosphere right now, we're going to experience extreme climate repercussions because of it. So we need to sequester, and we need to set benchmarks so that energy production companies can transition while we protect energy production workers' rights.
Thank you, Ike. Karen, you have 30 seconds.
Standard setting is a pretty complicated process, and I'm not sure whether new standards are necessary for the oil and gas industry or whether the existing laws are just not enforced enough. But that would be one thing to look into. And the industry, of course, has fought all efforts to be regulated even further. So I think that that's a possibility, is to, amend environmental laws, clean air laws to go after those industries. But whether it would come out of Congress, I would give it a very, very small chance.
Thank you. Jared's going to ask one more question, and then we're going to move to the lightning round, and then we'll move back to the longer questions. Jared?
All right. What are your top 2 priorities to work on for CD4 if elected, and why? How would you plan to push those causes through a broken Congress? She has me deep to ask you.
Is it me? Okay, so first things first is I think it's $13 billion anticipated in the next 6 years coming to Colorado from the Inflation Reduction Act to make us a world leader in renewable energy transmission and storage. Now, those have some pretty high labor standards already. There's Davis-Bacon built into it and prevailing wages. But I want to make sure to remove further obstacles to make sure that those jobs can be good union jobs. That's a critical piece of this. Why are jobs in the oil and gas industry so great? Because they come with a union, and because the union helped really improve the quality. So I want to make sure to do that in the transition to green energy, clean energy, and climate. Number 2, we need to bolster our STEM capabilities like yesterday. So taking, again, additional money from CHIPS and Science, where we're reshoring American manufacturing and semiconductors, but where we need to be looking forward at the industries of the future. So I want to be better connecting our education to our job outcomes and pushing those industries and our economies forward. So a lot of that is going to involve working with labor unions to bring the trades into high schools, both in the traditional fields, as well as, again, industries of the future. AI is a huge piece of it, and it's just pushing all these fields forward. So I would say writ large, it's going to be jobs in the economy. And then I would also say a big part of that is security, right? Because by investing in our STEM, by investing in our abilities to lead, that's one of the most important pieces of national security.
Thank you. Ike?
My number 1 priority when I get to Congress and when I represent the citizens of Congressional District 4 will be 1, and it will be to bring United States Americans, Congressional District 4 citizens, back together around our shared values and common interests again. We have far more in common than we have in difference with our Republican neighbors. It is critical for us to bring us back together as a community around our shared values again. If we want to win this election, we absolutely have to show up in every single rural community. So my number 1 priority would be to unify the citizens of Congressional District 4. My number 2 priority would be to bring investment into Congressional District 4 and support the industries and communities that exist in the eastern 21 counties. That means engaging with ranchers, that means engaging with farmers and corn growers, and understanding what their needs are, and understanding what their fears are, and providing legislation and providing a voice and a presence in their community that they can trust, that they find dependable. And so my number 1 priority as a congressman would be to work across the aisle, would be to bring the citizens of Congressional District 4 back together and to get work done for the people of District 4.
Thank you, Ike. Karen?
It's important to remember that most members of Congress, even with lengthier terms, generally have very few legislative accomplishments because of the way Congress works. So in bearing that in mind, that I think even Buck has like 5 or 6 pieces of legislation to his credit. So the ability to legislate is fairly limited as an individual member. I would be focusing on dealing with the rural health issue. People in our rural part of the district are really struggling from a lack of access to healthcare, substance abuse, lack of maternal care, lack of hospital facilities, et cetera. That's something that can be dealt with in a fairly short time frame by focusing with the local communities on why they're having difficulty having adequate health care. Like most of that funding comes through grant programs from the federal government. Are the programs too cumbersome? Are the deadlines wrong? Is the paperwork associated with it too difficult for small communities to manage and small providers to manage? What role is private equity playing in buying up hospitals all over the place? And is that influencing rural outcomes in terms of the healthcare access? That would be job one. If we can show that we can deal with that issue, we can get far. My second priority would be dealing with economic issues more generally, tax issues in particular, trying to move forward on policies that would benefit people, such as full deductibility of medical expenses rather than having that be capped as it is now.
Thank you, Karen. Trisha?
And then specifically not just CD4, but our entire nation, like I absolutely want to step up to restore our reproductive rights and our access to reproductive health care, period. That's not just for CD4, that is for all of Colorado and our nation, 100%. So I will say that that's also a priority. And I don't think of that as just a women's right issue. I think of that as absolutely an economic issue and an issue about our democracy, our freedoms, and our rights. So that's something I would step up for as well.
All right, perfect. Okay, so we're gonna move into the lightning round, and so this is literally yes or no. So I guess the easiest way is just we'll just continue to alternate, and it's simple. If there's a phrase that you're gonna answer, just a phrase, no explanations, my friends, no over talking. I haven't had to mute anyone. I'm so proud. And so I'll do the first 2, then Jared will do 2, then I'll do 2, and I think we have, what do we have? We have 17. So of course it's an odd number. All right. Would you advocate for increasing the minimum wage and the minimum wage for tipped workers? Yes or no? Ike?
Oh yeah, sorry. That was probably not my turn. But
Trisha,
yeah.
that was not you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Karen?
Yes, yes.
Trisha, we're going to take you as a yes.
Okay.
So we're going to start with Ike on this next one, Trisha. Would you support legislation reinstating the Banking Act of 1933, Glass-Steagall, the separation of investment banks from commercial banks that was repealed in 1999?
Yes.
Yes.
Heck to the yeah, these are great questions. Yes.
Okay, Jared?
All right. Would you support the reinstatement of the assault weapons ban?
Yes.
Starts with Karen.
Karen,
Trisha?
yes. Trisha?
Writ large, no.
No.
Would you support legislation requiring safe storage of firearms?
Trisha?
Yes.
Yes.
No, it's unconstitutional.
Okay,
Can I say that? Can I do that?
it's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Now you threw me off. Okay, Ike, would you support legislation requiring insurance for gun ownership?
No.
Karen?
No.
Trisha?
Yeah.
Okay. Karen, are you in favor of universal background checks?
Yes.
Trisha?
Yes.
Ike?
Yeah. Yes.
Your turn, Jared.
All right. Last one under gun control is, should teachers be trained to have a firearm in their classroom if they choose?
No.
If they choose, sure.
Yes. Should they be trained or should they have a firearm? Trained? Yes.
The question is, should teachers be trained to have a firearm in their
Oh.
classroom if they choose?
If they choose to be trained or if they choose to have a firearm? That's my question.
Well, both. right? Like I didn't think this was a complicated question. There's been a lot of discussion in recent years, to totally pause the lightning round, where in certain, not even states, but just certain communities, certain school districts, and there's been kind of this push that as a district, if you choose to want to allow your teachers to carry a firearm, that they would allow that. And the question is, but trained, right? They need to be trained to carry the firearm, to be in the school. Would you support a trained teacher carrying a firearm in school? That is the question.
Yes, some of our rural communities have no access to law enforcement, so yes.
Okay, so now it's a yes. Karen, what was your answer?
I'm still a no.
Trisha?
If not mandatory and voluntary, yes.
Okay.
All right, moving on. Would you support expanding the Supreme Court?
Trisha?
Yep.
Yes.
Now Ike.
Yes, sorry.
No.
Okay. Starting with Ike. Will you support Joe Biden as the Democratic presidential nominee?
100%. I already voted for him in the primary.
Karen?
Yes.
Trisha?
Yes, Biden and Harris. Kamala Harris is a yes.
Yes, so that goes without saying. She is his running mate. Okay. Karen, would you support legislation
I think it's supposed to be clarifying.
clarifying that presidents are not above the law and can be prosecuted if they violate US laws in or out of office?
I don't, I hate to be all legally, symbolically, yes.
go with the
Symbolically, it'll have no effect though. Okay, it won't mean a thing, but sure, I'd be happy to say, yes, I think that's a great idea, but it won't have any legal effect. It's up for the courts to decide what the powers and immunities of the president are.
Okay.
And so Congress
Okay,
can't.
okay.
Oh, sorry.
Trisha.
Yes. And maybe I can borrow Katie Porter's like whiteboard. Yes.
Okay. Ike.
Yes.
Okay. And we can come back to that question somewhere down the line, but I think the spirit of the question, and remember, these were all submitted by people, your voters, right? The spirit of the question is, would you support something that closes that question, closes that loophole, right? And I know that the immunity thing is going to be decided by the Supreme Court, but it's still things that are important to people and they want to know your standing on that. So remember that when sometimes it maybe legally doesn't sound like, oh, this is a thing, you're talking to the values of the people that are looking to vote for you. Jared,
All right.
turn again.
Yep. We're going to move on to a different topic. Should the U.S. continue to fund Ukraine defenses and offenses against Russia and Putin?
Trisha.
Yes.
Yes, 100%.
Karen.
I'm undecided. Do I have to pick one or the other? Can I be undecided?
You can be undecided.
Okay, I'm undecided.
All right, moving on again. Do you support Medicare for all?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's like, yep.
Yeah, Ike. Karen.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely.
Should there be restrictions of any kind on reproductive care? Starting with Karen.
Not that I can think of.
Trisha.
Oh, no, no.
Ike.
No, I support an equal rights amendment so that all citizens have autonomy.
Okay. Jared, you want to take one more and then I'll take the last three? Since you're
Sure. Yeah, no, that's fine. Would you continue Colorado's legacy in the U.S. House of cannabis legalization and advocate to remove it as a Schedule I drug?
Ike.
Yeah.
Yes.
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 Okay. Karen, do you support continuing the child tax credit?
Yes.
Trisha?
Yes, the real one, not the fake one that Lauren Boebert tried to introduce for like
The real
person.
one. The real
Yeah.
one. Ike.
Yes, I support the reinstatement of the child tax credit.
Okay. Trisha, would you support increasing funding to land grant colleges for all people?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I would love to, yes.
Ike?
Yes.
Karen?
The all people's got me a little bit thrown. What's that mean exactly?
Again, posed by.
Okay. All right. Yes. Funding, more funding is always good. Yes.
Okay.
I didn't know what all people meant though.
All right, Ike, you get the last question in the lightning round, which hasn't been as lightning as I might have anticipated. If you are the Democratic nominee, would you engage your GOP opponent to have a debate?
Yes, I already have.
Karen,
Yes.
Trisha.
Relentlessly.
All right. So let's move back. We don't have that many questions left. But we will go to the next question. So we will start back with Ike as the first person, then Karen, then Trisha. So starting with you, Ike, minute 30 seconds. What do you think is a high priority issue for communities on the Eastern Plains? And how do you plan to address that issue if you are elected to represent our district?
I think we've talked about quite a few high priority issues already. Water is, of course, an extremely high priority issue. We've talked about ways that we would address it. Rural healthcare, I think, is one of the most important issues that remains unaddressed. Rural broadband as well, but rural healthcare in particular. In the veteran community, for instance, prior to the pandemic, there was mobile veteran units that would go out to Morgan County and the other rural constituencies in District 4 and provide a mobile clinic where veterans could get seen. In some places, out in Lamar, for instance, you have to drive an hour, sometimes 112 miles to get to a maternal care unit where somebody can give birth. I don't think that citizens of District 4 should have to give birth on the side of a highway. I think reinvestment in rural schools, reinvestment in rural healthcare facilities, and investment in smart water storage programs, infrastructure in the district are things that I would be very laser focused on, as well as education funding. Students out in District 4 are in many places in many counties are limited to 4 days of education per week instead of 5. We need equitable investment and access to education, healthcare services in our district. And
Ike,
what's up?
Karen?
Rural healthcare for me as well. Reduced lifespans in some of these rural communities, that's just unacceptable. Disparities in funding, that needs to be addressed and could be addressed potentially through federal legislation, again, by looking at the existing funding mechanisms, grant programs, and finding out why those programs aren't hitting the target, why communities are not benefiting sufficiently. And I'm also thinking about microgrants, ways to kind of support communities that are struggling with issues of isolation, especially in the post-pandemic era, especially when people leave those communities because there's insufficient economic activity. And we were in Lyman, it was Yuma. And, a gentleman pointed out to us the problem of mental health in those communities. We need to really address that as well. And I think that could be done with microgrants. There used to be granges that were community centers that functioned in providing social support as well as educational opportunities. And I think, federal funding for initiatives like that, even in small dollar amounts, could really help bring communities together that, pardon me, are otherwise deeply isolated. Pardon me.
Are you okay? Okay. All right, Trisha, we'll
Okay,
give her a little extra time to,
okay. All right, so I would say, so I've lived in Southwest Pennsylvania, which is that's like Pennsylvania rural, right? Like it rains and you can't drive on the roads. And I would hear this conflict over and over again, talking to young people, and it was this horrible choice they'd have to make between care and opportunities. Do you stay in your rural community that you love, that raised you, and to help take care of your family, or do you leave to the city centers, to the urban centers to find opportunity? So really my priority for the eastern part of Colorado is that nobody should have to make that impossible choice between both care and opportunity. That's why the internet is so important. We have to start with that. That can help with telehealth, right? Like helping folks access like that care immediately, but also bringing opportunities to folks, meeting them where they are, not asking folks to have to pick up and move and leave. Moreover, if we have certain incentives, certain programs, right, where we can incentivize remote work for people young families who do live in Silicon Valley or live on the East Coast in these city centers that are so expensive, we can incentivize them to move to places like Prowers, where a German bus company picked up and moved in 2005, took hundreds of jobs with them. And there's been really little economic development since then. So those are my main things is opportunity through economic development and care infrastructure, investing in that in rural America.
thanks,
And-
Trisha. I,
Could you repeat that question? This is my 30-second rebuttal.
this is your 30-second rebuttal.
Gotcha. My 30 seconds is almost gone, probably. No, I think that making sure that rural communities have access to the facilities and the services that they need, healthcare, education, and water are huge in our district. And I think that we need to focus on those and make sure that we get out into the communities and have conversations with people. And we need to make sure that we have those conversations across the aisle in the Congress to make sure we allocate funding for rural healthcare facilities.
Thank you. And Karen, was there anything that you wanted to add? I know since you were unceremoniously
you.
cut off by comment.
Just documenting the lack of parity in urban versus rural funding. That's something you could request the Congressional Research Service to do, and you could focus it on specific programs. That's something that I would do to try to demonstrate that disparity and get some congressional action on solving that with the appropriations committees.
Okay, thank you. Jared, you have the next question.
All right. What areas of education do you believe the federal government has a role? And what are the best ways for the federal government to support those areas? And
Yeah, well, I've talked about federal Investment in Education Act and equitable federal Investment in Education Act, and I think that fundamentally every United States citizen, pupil, student should have an equitable amount, a dollar amount invested in their education, and that is exactly what actually provides them with a more equitable opportunity to advance and live the American dream. So, I think that my priorities would be working with my colleagues and developing ways and means of increasing, federal subsidies to educational facilities like those in Lake County, for instance, or like those down in Baca or up in Sedgwick or Phillips or Sterling, because those rural communities just simply do not produce as much property tax, and property tax is what drives investment in education. And so I think the federal government has a significant role to play in lifting up the investment in counties like Lake County, where about $2,300 a year is invested in students' education. When you go next door to Aspen, it's about $8,000. We need in rural communities to have investment in our students' education and educational facilities and teachers' pay so that we can
Thanks,
remain the world's leader.
Karen.
Um, so I think one issue is the quality of the education. The funding parity is really important, and there's already federal programs that help contribute to alleviating that, at least to some extent. Whether those programs are sufficient, I think, is something that we need to understand why they're not, why students aren't getting parity in funding. But I also think we need to figure out the quality problem, because we are spending a lot of money. We're close to $1 trillion on public education in this country. And so why is that not producing the outcomes? And I know it's not, because I'm a university professor and I see the quality of work that students turn in. And there really seems to be a big gap in, kind of the skills, the basic skills that people would need to do university level work. It might be appropriate for there to be some kind of again, maybe the Congressional Research Service, there may be some hearings on why schools are underperforming, but not near enough is done to deal with that, because marginalized communities are dealing with did I say underfunding, underperforming schools. And what can we do to address those underperforming schools? What are the cause of it? The other thing I would say is that we can't really solve the education conundrum without dealing with the bigger issues that affect children's lives. Lack of food security, lack of housing security, domestic violence, those sorts of problems. So I think we need a whole student approach to trying to improve education in this country. And I think the federal government would be a good vehicle for trying to get at pieces and parts of that whole student situation. Funding, again, parity is super important.
Thank you. Tricia?
I think that it is going to require a bit of a whole of government approach for some of these emerging technologies and fields. So specifically in artificial intelligence, I do think that there should be a government agency that creates the resource. Like, artificial intelligence is often based on a large language model, and they should build one that has input from the most inclusive swath of Americans as possible. Because right now we're seeing a bunch of models in the private sector, and they're incredibly biased. They leave significant sectors of our population out. And so it's very biased, and it's pay to play. So I think that there does need to be a national resource that is available for learners at all levels, at all ages, because artificial intelligence is already, like, you're going to see tremendous changes in the next 10 years. So I think Department of Labor, working with the Department of Education, working with labor unions and employers, like good actors like Microsoft, for example, to create a resource where people can always come to upskill and reskill without having to move away from home or having to take out loans for very expensive master's or graduate programs that don't necessarily lead to a job. That's the other thing that I think is very important, is I think Department of Education needs to stay on it, on preventing scams, on preventing these so-called, for-profit models disguised as nonprofit that are completely taking advantage of people. I think that needs to be a big piece. And also looking at creative ways to alleviate student debt.
Thank you, Tricia. Somehow we're back to 30 seconds on Ike to rebut, so we definitely got out of a wacky order. But Ike, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, just that, we need to make sure that our communities have the resources that they need, and educational funding is the number one most important resource that we can possibly provide as the United States government to ensure our in-state national security. And I think that ensuring that teachers have pay and livable wages is part of that equation. And we need to make sure that our teachers are paid well enough to live in the communities where they teach.
Thank you. Okay, so Karen, I'm going to start with you. Given the diversity of the demographics across CD4 between urban and rural, what steps will you take to ensure that you are representing all of your constituents should you be elected to this seat?
I would want to set up as many offices as possible. I know budgets can be limiting in that regard, but there could be something like satellite offices or traveling representatives to go throughout the district. And I would rotate my meetings throughout the district as well, so that I'm present in all parts of the district. I would try to really understand what the needs of each of these communities are. As a county is diverse and is prosperous as Douglas is obviously going to look a whole lot different than a county like Baca. So what are the specific issues that affect people in Douglas? What are the specific issues that affect people in Baca? I have some sense of that at this point, but that ground truthing on that is sorry, I just got distracted by the beep. As a member of Congress would be, part of what I would try to do on a very regular basis. Because again, I think building that link between the representative and the community and really understanding their values and the things that matter to them is important to being able to represent them well. And again, with a district as diverse as this one, that becomes more challenging for obvious reasons. I also think it's important to really listen to people who may not have even, maybe diehard Republicans and Boebert fans and whomever else, to bring them to the table and to find out what their needs and interests are. Because I do believe that unifying the district is of, extreme importance. I agree with Ike on that point as well.
Thank you, Karen. Trisha?
I want to going to every single county multiple times, showing up, being there in person, and being available online, and engaging, I think, outreach specifically to different demographics who have been overlooked and left behind, and being intentional about that. So one thing that I'm doing through my campaign, we are outreaching very hard to young folks. It's so critical. We want to bring their voices into the fold. We want to make sure that they're being heard, especially in rural America. I think that there's like a lot of just overlooked potential for the young people in our rural parts of our district. So making sure that there's like a way that those folks can not only engage with our campaign, but that they can continue to plug in and to give feedback to our office, and that our office is serving those folks. Again, there's so much money on the table. The biggest thing we can do to unite all of it is to make sure that it is coming here to our communities, our districts, that we're investing in our families right here at home. We can be a world leader, and at the to sound a little Pollyanna, we have the potential to feed the world right here in CD4. And that's something that Jared always says. It always inspires me. And I truly believe it from the bottom of my heart. But it's throughout the whole district, right? It's not just Douglas County, but it is Douglas County, and it's all 21 districts count.
Thank you. Ike?
I think we need to show up in every single community. And I think that when we show up, we need to have already organized meetings with each county's county commissioners, police chiefs, fire chiefs, city council persons, and create a schedule, a sit-down schedule, where these individual county community leaders actually have a direct voice, a direct line of communication with their representative, with their congressperson. And I think that those community leaders, county commissioners specifically, can do a very good job of informing the congressional representative at the federal level of exactly what their community needs. Like out in Yuma County, for instance, I was talking to a county commissioner out there. They're able to afford to install about 1 mile of clean water systems and pipes per year. That's not nearly enough to even, replace aging infrastructure. And so I believe that by going and engaging directly with every single one of the 21 counties, county commissioners, and gaining a sense or a direct knowledge of exactly what their communities need, we can better serve them in the federal government, set them up for success with funding and subsidies from Congress.
Thank you, Ike. Karen, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I don't think there's anything to rebut on that. I'm going to pass.
Okay, that is entirely allowed. All right, Jared is going to ask the next 2 questions. Jared?
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Medicare Part C insurance advantage plans are not available to all seniors over 65. You must live in a zip code that is supported by a Part C plan, and that there's many parts of CD4 that are not. What steps would you take to improve health access or healthcare access in rural communities for our seniors?
That starts with Trisha.
This is why Medicare for All is so important. I've just been kind of studying this like Medicare Advantage plan, and it just seems like a total for-profit scheme, right? Where it's kind of this like middleman that's just siphoned up the public funding to profit a very few at the top. So I'm advocating for Medicare for All. I think that is so incredibly important. And to pay for it, right? How do we pay for it? Through our Social Security, raise the cap on billionaires, right? Like they're done paying like taxes on their income starting this year, right? Whereas the rest of us, working class people, pay a much higher percent into Social Security on our income. So that's it's starving our hospitals. It is dangerous to our hospitals, these types of like for-profit schemas. So I'm pushing hard for a Medicare for all to protect our seniors, and to pay for it, we can go ahead and have the wealthiest people in our country pay their fair share. But it's the seniors aspect, it's terrifying, it's unacceptable, and it absolutely, like, it needs to stop. So I'm all in for completely reforming it.
Thank you. Ike?
I just yeah, would really echo what Trish said. And in addition to that, you know, I would say that in the immediate term, we need to do everything that we can, taking every step possible to make healthcare as affordable as possible. To make it so that you know, we can negotiate and import down the cost and import prescription medications from safe locations like Canada, and drive down the cost of healthcare in general. Trisha, 100% right. You know, these massive pharmacy benefit management companies, these middlemen, they suck up millions and billions of dollars. And in the United States, we pay for more for healthcare than anywhere else in the world. And so, from my perspective, it's really profiteering, fraud, waste, and abuse that's eating up all of the revenue that should be going into our healthcare system. And it's particularly tough for seniors out in rural Colorado. And at one of the forums, you know, one of the candidates said that we should probably engage in enacting entitlement reform. But I think that's completely the wrong answer. We should not take Social Security away from our seniors. We should make sure that we pass a wealth tax and fully fund Social Security and rural healthcare facilities.
Thank you, Ike. Karen?
Yeah, I agree with Ike about the wealth tax and fully funding Medicare and Social Security. I think Medicare for all is probably some distance off just because of the politics of it. But in the meantime, there could be some legislation and appropriations to cap out-of-pocket costs for seniors who are on Medicare, regardless of whatever plan there is, because those plans are designed to offset the costs. Plenty of seniors end up having to make trade-offs in terms of what they use their money for. Do I get this particular procedure, or do I pay for my groceries and my rent? That kind of trade-off is unconscionable for our elders, and it needs to stop. So we need funding that's sufficient to meet people's needs. If we can't have Medicare for all, we should at least be capping the out-of-pocket costs for people who are on those plans.
Thank you, Karen. Trisha, did you want to add anything?
I'd add we also need to go after Medicare fraud and abuse. There's a lot of bad actors. They need to be held accountable. And I think that we need to reverse the profiteering and return those investments back to the people. I think we also need to expand what we think of care when we think of elder care, right? It's not just your prescriptions. It's also, it's hearing, it's your mental health. And I would even argue it's your housing, of being able to retrofit your house so that you can age in place with dignity, and that you can, that you get to retire in dignity and age in place.
Thank you, Trisha. Jared?
All right, and the reason why I get two in a row is because this next one is a little bit personal for me. In light of the Supreme Court and lower courts removing of reproductive rights and setting back personal freedoms by decades, it is unimaginable to think that the attacks will stop at women. Justice Thomas has already sent up a warning flare to the LGBTQ community. What will you do to protect my freedoms and expand the rights of my trans brethren in the alphabet soup?
That
Yeah.
starts with you, Ike.
Gotcha. Well, this question is hits really close to home. My 14-year-old identifies as a member of the community, and so my heart goes out to you for all of the hate that your community faces unjustly. So I would support, as I've previously stated, passing an equal rights amendment to the Constitution that would fully federally protect the right to choose and fully provide medical autonomy to all United States Americans. And that, I believe, that fundamental freedom cannot be infringed upon in a country that claims to be free. I would 100% support federally protecting the right to choose, passing an equal rights amendment to the Constitution to ensure that every single American citizen is treated with equity under the law, as they should be.
Thank you, Ike. Karen?
Yeah, I like that idea too. My sister was lesbian back in the 70s, and the abuse and the discrimination that she experienced ended her life early, and that's a grief I carry with me all the time. And so I'm deeply concerned about a rollback of those protections. And I think a constitutional amendment is the most protective mechanism. I think the Supreme Court's interpretation of the civil rights law, though, makes it less likely, at least on that front, that a negative decision on privacy rights would necessarily overturn protections against discrimination and other facets of a person's life. But I'm still deeply concerned about that. And I think that electing, Democrats to office is really the best way to ensure that. And a constitutional amendment is the best way over the long haul to kind of ensure that we've got those rights covered.
Thank you, Karen. Trisha?
I think along with protections for IVF, we need protections for trans care. Absolutely. We also need to make sure that people in their workplaces feel safe. So this is, again, union rights are very important for people in the LGBTQ community. I would also make it like no book bans, right? So where we can't allow like these schools to start demonizing trans LGBTQ people. I think it's also, I'm going to be very open to the community and hearing what their needs are of like what we can do to move the needle forward. I personally, every room I walk into, I introduce myself with my pronouns to try to be welcoming as possible. Just even if that can reach one person, one kid, to let them know that's okay to be who they are. I'm more than happy to do that. That's a big piece of it. But also, I think that an equal rights amendment does make sense. There's also, again, from the medical perspective and making sure that we can preserve the rights of couples who are same sex, of making sure that there's protection for marriage as well, and access to healthcare. Those are the two big ones.
Thank you, Trisha. Ike, did you want to add anything to what was said, or?
No, I think it's been pretty well wrapped up.
Okay. So, Karen, starting with you. Now, I don't want you to confuse this. This question's a little tricky. So you're kind of, I don't know every single person who's registered for this, but this is a Democratic forum, right? So it's a relatively safe space of ideas, with the general idea that we all kind of come from this, certain area of belief. And so I don't want you to confuse this question with what your closing will be to the people who are watching this forum, but it'll be somewhat similar. Okay. Imagine you have 2 minutes to convince a traditional Republican voter. And by the word traditional, I mean someone who typically almost always votes Republican, right? So they may be a traditional Republican, they might be a MAGA Republican, they might be unaffiliated, but they traditionally vote Republican. And you have 2 minutes to convince them to choose you over your opponent. Who may or may not be a MAGA Republican. How will you convince them that you are the best choice when they fill out their ballot? Give us your best shot.
Me?
Yep.
Well, I kind of do this on a somewhat regular basis anyway. So the Republicans are screwing over their constituencies and pointing out to them the ways that the Republicans do that is part and parcel of convincing them to vote for us. And what I mean by screwing over is that they take votes and they enact policies that harm the material interests of people in this district, including those who vote Republican. And they do it under the guise of, sort of like self-reliance and small government and fighting socialism. And it's absolute nonsense. Socialism is not even remotely a part of our political process in the United States. I say this as a political science professor. I can go out and tackle that ridiculous rhetoric and explain to people why that argument is a non-starter. And people will get it pretty quick because what they know is that the system is rigged. They just point the fingers in the wrong directions. Republicans have helped direct wealth to the top. And when I point that out to people, they generally are like, I hadn't thought about it quite that way before. And, sometimes I actually get a convert. And so that would be my approach, is to really focus on, what do you expect your government to do? Do you expect your government to mess you over? And if you don't, how do you explain the fact that Trump did this and Boebert did that? And I think that, kind of awareness raising and puncturing that cloud of rhetoric that people like Boebert and Trump use is essential to persuading them.
Okay, Trisha.
All right, well, I always start by telling them that my dad was a classic Nixon-loving Republican. And before he died, he told me to run. So he was my very first endorsement. So I was endorsed by a Republican. That was my first endorsement. Thank you. And my mom was also a Trump-loving MAGA voter. She came from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I mean, she came from an area that 30 years of offshoring and outsourcing, policy enabled by both parties, she saw her community suffer. And so I understand that. This is my argument. The post-World War II order has shifted. What comes next is going to be decided in the next 5 to 10 years. The question before us, is the United States going to continue to lead with our values of democracy, of freedom and opportunity, or not? Or are we going to cede the future to folks who maybe don't share our values, like a Chinese Communist Party in China that is rising? And no, they're eating our lunch right now on certain technologies. We can catch up. We need to invest now. We need a leader who understands that and who isn't going to put themselves and an aspiring despot before the people. I am running to serve the people, all of us in this district. I know where the money is, and I'm going to connect it to our communities, to our small towns, to our small business owners. And Colorado 4 is going to help the US lead the world.
Thank you, Trisha. Ike?
I just did this recently, showing up out in Lamar at a Republican event. But do you all remember what it was like? Did you see those planes streak through the sky and smash into those buildings, taking the lives of Americans? Do you guys remember what that was like? I do. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I remember where I was the very next day at the United States Marine Corps recruiting station, raising my right hand and swearing back into active duty and hopping a one-way ticket to the front lines to fight for my country, the Constitution that I love, for your community, for your rights, for your liberty. I will fight for you like I fought for my Marines. I don't care if you're an independent, a Democrat, or Republican. I care about you. I care about your family. I love you and I love your family because you're United States Americans. I would take a bullet for each and every one of you, and I would go to the front lines again for you today. I care about your churches. I want to make sure that your kids' schools are funded and that they have food on their table. Well, I'm out of time.
You're out of time.
But that's how you convince people. It's with a personal message. We have to show up and we have to appeal to their perspective and persuasions and fears. And that's how we can win their hearts and minds.
Okay, thank you, Ike.
Thank you.
Karen, was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, I guess the only thing I would say is that a member of Congress generally can't direct funding out of federal programs after the programs have been enacted. There can be some assistance along those lines, but not a lot. There's not a lot that can happen by an individual member of Congress when they are acting as a legislator. The vast majority of pieces of legislation that are introduced in Congress go absolutely nowhere. They never get a hearing. Nobody ever talks about them. It's like it didn't happen. That doesn't stop members of Congress from crowing about the fact that they introduced something.
Okay, so now we're moving to you guys giving your true final pitch to everyone on here. But what I would like to say to all the people that are still on here is that once they finish their pitch, I'm going to put up an anonymous poll for y'all to vote in, just kind of a straw poll, so that these guys get some feedback on how they performed today and how they're doing in their persuasion overall to voters to be the Democratic nominee for CD4. So it's not anonymous for you all to click on. Nobody will know what you voted for or anything like that. And it's within the Zoom, so you don't have to leave the Zoom or anything. It'll just pop up on your screen. So we'll do that once we get through the final persuasion section, and then we'll do a little quick closing, talk about caucus and assembly, and this will be over. So with that, 2 minutes for your closing remarks, and Karen started the last one. So Trisha, you are first.
Thank you all so much for all of you to be here. I think everybody in this meeting has something in common with Alexei Navalny. And I don't say that lightly, and I say that as the biggest compliment possible, but I think everybody is here on this beautiful Saturday day on a Zoom call because you all care about democracy. You care about American values like the freedom of speech and the freedom to choose. So during the Arab Spring, I went online and I made friends on Facebook. This is when social media was it was more of a hopeful medium. And I made friends in Saudi Arabia, and we ended up launching an international viral new media campaign to help win women's driving rights in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, some of those folks we were able to keep out of jail, but many more are in prison right now today. I believe it was Congressman Garcia who recently reminded all of us Saudi Arabia paid Jared Kushner $2 billion. And this was over the advice of a panel of Saudi advisors who said that is a bad investment. MBS overrode it and they invested in Jared. I mention that because the stakes are serious. We have an aspiring despot and his family, and they have a plan to gut our democracy. I am running to step up and to prevent it. And I am the only person in this race who is in Washington, D.C., who helped the Biden-Harris administration pass landmark legislation in the Inflation Reduction Act that is the biggest climate bill in U.S. history, as well as CHIPS and Science Act, which is reshoring American innovation. I helped pass that legislation, and I'm going to bring those investments home to our communities that have been overlooked, left behind. I am running on a pro-choice, pro-union agenda, and together, all of us together, we are going to exercise our rights and we are going to save democracy this election, and we can flip this sheet. Thank you all. Trisha Calvarese, get in touch and we can win. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Trisha. Ike. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ike.
Okay, well, CD4 Democrats, thank you all so much. I cannot express my sincere, heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you enough. Your participation here tonight in the democratic process is absolutely critical in our ability to select the candidate that is absolutely the best prepared, the best positioned, and the best funded to win our seat in the U.S. House. I am that candidate. I was the candidate in 2020 and 22. I have the best name recognition of any candidate in Congressional District 4 in this race. We have raised $700,000. Adam Frisch proved to us that if we have the right moderate message, the right candidate, and the funding, that these tough rural districts are 100% winnable. We're on track to raise $1 million by the end of this quarter. And that is what is going to enable us to do the outreach that we need to do to continue to build upon the work that we have done over the last 6 years, over the last 2 cycles of running for office. And I campaigned for years in this district even before I ran for office. I care deeply about each and every one of you, about your communities, and I think that we have to stay laser focused on how we win the 4th Congressional District. If we have the right candidate, if we have the right funding, which we're going to have this cycle, we can win. Betsy Markey flipped this in 2008. We can win over the 54% of Jared Polis voters in Douglas County, and we can win over the 30% of Betsy Markey voters in the eastern 20 counties that have voted red ever since 2008. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you. I cannot express my gratitude enough for you making me your nominee.
Thank you, Ike. Karen, bring it home.
Okay. I don't think a moderate message is going to appeal to Republicans, especially not the MAGA Republicans that dominate in this district. If by moderate means we don't speak forcefully for the needs of working families, which is what Trump and company do. They do it in a fake way, but they do it. We're only going to flip this district by speaking to the material needs of people in these communities. That I'm prepared to do in the tradition of Bernie Sanders and Barack Obama, et cetera. There's overlap between Trump voters and Bernie voters. Hard to wrap our heads around, but it's true. We're not going to defend women's rights by sending more men to Congress. We need women. We need to send women to Congress. If we want to protect abortion rights, we need women to be there. In places where women are underrepresented, abortion rights are under extreme attack. Congress, 30% is female. We're more than 50% of the population. The Senate, it's even worse. We want to defend women's right to choose. We need to send women there. And women need to be active in this race. And so I'm hopeful that you will all give some consideration to all of these points and really think about what you want over the long haul. I bring more qualifications for this race. You've heard me a couple of times say, well, maybe you're right. It depends, because these are hard decisions that don't come easily to anybody who knows the process. I can't promise to bring jobs to your district. Nobody can, because that's not how Congress works. That's not how funding out of the federal government works. I can promise that I'll fight for those jobs when the opportunity presents itself, and I'll try to create those opportunities. But I'm realistic to you and with you about what members of Congress actually do and what the federal government is capable of doing under the Constitution. Why don't I want to amend the court to make it larger? Because it's dangerous. Because minority rights are a function of court protection, not democratic processes. And so think about how we got rid of white supremacy in the South through an unelected court. That's why I oppose that. I'll always tell you my hard truths. I'll always want your feedback. I'll always be open to hearing what you have to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So right now I'm going to pop this poll up there. Again, it's anonymous. And while I pop this up on here, Jared, do you want to give some closing remarks?
Yeah, I just want to thank our candidates for being here today. It's very important that we as CD4 provide you all with the opportunity to hear from our candidates. Remember that your caucus, assembly, and convention for most of us, especially in the rural areas, is on March 9th. I'm going to do a little pitch there, Lisa. And I know that some of the bigger counties, you do have your caucuses on the 9th, but your assemblies are going to be on the 16th, I believe, for like Weld County and Douglas County, I believe. So, and maybe Larimer as well for those of you who are in Larimer County. Lisa and I are trying our best to get Democrats in the Eastern Plains to remember that we're here. It's something I've heard a lot since I've come to Morgan County is that, wow, I didn't realize there were Democrats here. So we have sent postcards, and a lot of you should have gotten those if you live in the rural counties of CD4. There's 8 counties without a party. We've sent postcards to every Democrat in those particular counties. And great news is that we've got people in Crowley County that have signed up for caucus. We've got people in Sedgwick County that have signed up for caucus. We've got people in Washington County that have signed up for caucus. And these are counties that haven't had caucus in 2, 4, 10 years. And so it's really nice to see the fruits of our labor, because Lisa and I buy into inviting every Democrat to caucus and allowing people to have their voice heard.
Thank you, Jared. And so with that, almost everyone has voted. There's 8 of you that haven't voted yet. It's okay if you don't want to vote. But we would love to hear from you before we end this poll. And I just want to say one, thank you to the candidates for making the time to be here to answer questions, really like jumbled questions. We took these directly as people came, and I thought that was real as people registered and submitted them. And I thought that was very, very important, because that's going to be how it is if you're out there talking to folks, right? They're not going to be like, oh, what topic are we talking about today? And we tried to kind of throw some tough questions out there that aren't your typical talking points. And so, as you all know, the overall goal of the CD4 officers of the Democratic Party is to provide as many opportunities as we possibly can to show up so that folks can speak up, so that you can hear them, so that you have opportunities to speak up, so that every single resident in CD4, regardless of political party, knows that their voice and their vote matter. And so opportunities like this to do an online forum, which we will hopefully do a lot more, and then we'll entice Republicans maybe to participate as well. That'll make it a little spicy, right? Is to really get people to engage, right? Like, we're fighting for our democracy, as I said in the beginning. So with that said, I would just like to thank all of the people who registered to be on here. We will post this video. I will make sure it's posted on the YouTube page. It will be posted on our website. We will provide the raw file copy to each of the candidates so that you can have that for your own use as well. And then I would just encourage everyone on here, go to the websites of these candidates, learn more, reach out to them. Every single one of them will happily get on a phone call with you, meet you for coffee. They want to know what matters to you. They also need volunteers. They need donations. They need all the things, right? And so CD4 is raising money to bring things like this to you, to send out postcards to every resident in every registered Democrat in 12 counties, to show up here, there, and everywhere. So with that, I will just say thank you. We will do this again, and it's been my pleasure.